right, we are live. Recording has started. I'm here with Josh Bodnar. He is a board of director for NACU. He is the director of BuckID at the Ohio State University, and he's also an Eagle Scout. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Luke. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for making the time. I got to ask, are you making the trip on down to Eugene this weekend for the big Ohio State-Oregon game?
It's a little too far for me, but I will most definitely be watching the game. I was, however, at our win over Iowa this weekend.
Yes, that was a big win. So for those of you who don't know, I actually went to Ohio State. So Josh and I share in our joy for the Buckeyes. But yeah, you got a card office to run. You don't got time to make a trip on down to Oregon. So I get that.
As much as I might like to.
Yeah. Yep. What about, hey, if they make it to the national championship, do you think you're gonna go to the game?
I might. Student Life, which is where BuckID sits at Ohio State, runs bowl tours. Usually we'll have some students go, but usually a lot of our band parents will travel with us. And I have in the past been one of the tour guides on those bowl trips. Many people might remember 2 years ago our appearance at the Peach Bowl that ended very sadly for us.
Tragic.
Right at the stroke of midnight. But I was on that trip as a tour guide, and it was funny. We do a bus trip, and Sean Stewart, who's my assistant director here at BuckID, in his spare time is a professional bus driver, motor coach driver. So he drove the bowl trip, and I was the on-bus entertainment. So we did trivia. We had a good time. I had prizes to give out during our drive. So there's a good chance that we might, right now we're number 2 in the nation. So I'm expecting to make a bowl appearance and hopefully an appearance in the national championship. And I would love to be there again.
Yeah, I remember 2 years ago where I was at midnight when we missed that field goal. I was with a group of friends, actually. None of them were Ohio State fans, and they just cared about seeing the ball drop. So the game ends.
Oh, I watched a ball drop, all right.
That's right. And they immediately switched the channel to the ball dropping, and I'm over in the corner just, depressed about life.
And funny story, that's where I was sitting. I was sitting in that end zone where that field goal went wide. It was right in front of me, and I went,
no.
But to be fair, no one expected us to do that well in that game. We significantly overperformed expectations against Georgia in that game.
It's true. It's true.
It wasn't all sad, but certainly we would have liked to have won.
It would have been.
I feel like if we had a good chance that we would have been the national champions that year. But
yeah, absolutely. Well, we didn't join the call to talk about the Buckeye team, but let me get into the first question, which is, as I was doing some research before the call, I noticed you went to Youngstown State University and studied middle childhood education, and then you got your master's in education at Ohio University. So, did you always know you wanted to be in the education field?
Yeah, I went back and forth on what level I wanted to be most involved with. There was a point when I was younger that I thought I might like to be a music teacher. I was a band kid all through middle school and high school. And then at one point I was thinking maybe high school science, physics, and chemistry. And then my guidance counselor at the time said, the best job prospects are at the middle school level because you can specialize in more content areas. There's more of a need of middle school teachers. In retrospect, there's more of a need of middle school teachers because it takes a special kind of person to spend 30 years in middle school. So that's why I chose middle childhood education. I enjoyed my undergrad degree program. I did do my teaching internship, but that was the point at which I went, 30 years in middle school. I'm not sure that's the right fit. And like many people who end up going into higher education, like no one comes out of high school going, you know what, I'm going to get a degree in higher ed and go work at a university. Usually you end up having experiences in college that kind of expose you to the idea that, oh, this can be a career. People work in higher ed. And that's kind of what happened for me. So I worked for the honors program the first 3 years of undergrad. And when I was starting to have this, well, maybe I want to get a master's in higher ed idea enter my mind, my mentor at the time said, why don't you think about going to grad school in higher ed? I think that might be a good fit for you. And, maybe next year look for a position that'll give you more exposure to that. So my senior year, I was a resident assistant. I left the honors program and was an RA for a year. Loved it, loved the experience. And that kind of cemented that was the direction I wanted to go. I really enjoy working with college students. And even when I was working for the honors program, part of my responsibilities were to give tours to prospective honors students. So I was, if you were interested in honors at YSU in circa 2005, I probably gave you a tour of campus, walked you around, took you through the residence hall, told you about the program. So that was kind of, I kind of like this higher ed thing. I like working with either older high school students, young adults in college, and that's kind of where it springboarded. Obviously, after that, I ended up at Ohio University, where I did my master's degree, which is a beautiful small town. I am more of a small town person. If you would have asked me 10 years ago if I would be at Ohio State living in Columbus, Ohio, I would have told you, no, you're crazy. I'm a small town kind of guy, but life takes you in strange directions. But I loved Athens as a town. I loved my 2 years of grad school there. And fortunately for me, there was a position open before I finished my master's, and the rest is history. I was at OU for almost 10 years. My first real kind of big kid job was I was a residence hall director, which
Okay.
is an adventure in a college town with a certain reputation for a Halloween party and other evening activities. So I did that for a couple of years. But I've always had an interest in kind of technology and IT in general and kind of application development. And while I was a hall director, an opportunity came up. There had been a kind of a reorganization of departments, and housing at the time needed someone to do marketing and to run the campus cable television system. And that was my first non-live-in job. I was the assistant director at the time. The title was like sales promotion and service communication, which I don't even know what that means today. And I had the job for 5 or 6 years. But while I was in the role, we had some IT students in housing and residence life at OU at the time, and they were just kind of reporting to one of our clerical staff in the office, but there wasn't really anyone technical enough to train them or supervise them or help kind of manage them. And it became clear that I had that background. So that moved into what I was doing at OU in housing. And then I became the assistant director for communication and technical operations, which is where I got my first job that was specifically focused on IT or systems. And it's kind of funny because that's exactly how you trace my career progression into a card office.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I was wondering, like, you've always seemed pretty technical, and I'm wondering where that came from. So it was at OU.
Yep, that's when I got my first technical job. And so I tended to be the person, like, if we were going to do a construction project, or if we were going to do some kind of RFP or a partnership with another department on campus and involve technology, I would be the person there representing housing, including when we did our RFP to update our card system. And then that turned into, hey, you seem to be good at this. Why don't you leave housing and be the first director of the card office? So that's how I made the transition out of
Gotcha.
more traditional student affairs and housing and into campus card.
Yeah, makes sense. Well, that's very cool. Yeah, thanks for laying that out. That's really, I always like to ask, how'd you become a card office director? Like how'd you get into this world? I didn't even know it existed when I was going through college. And then obviously my job now, I'm very well aware of the card office. So yeah, it's always interesting to see that career path. I noticed you have a scholarship named after you at Youngstown State University.
I do.
How does that even happen?
So this is my career path has interesting zigs and zags along the way. So we already talked about that Youngstown State is where I went to school. I grew up in the Youngstown area, worked there as a student employee, and then after I left Athens, but before I came to Columbus, I went back to Youngstown State for almost 2 years. It's funny, I mentioned earlier the mentor who kind of said, "Hey, I think higher ed would be a good option for you." She was the assistant director of the honors programs at the time. She's now the dean of honors at Youngstown State. So I'd hit a point in my career at OU. There were some administrative changes. There just the direction they were headed, there wasn't a good fit for me anymore. So I had started kind of looking, what other options might I have? And as you can imagine, there's like one of me at each school, and sometimes there's like a quarter of a card office director. So finding a position in a card office was going to be a tough undertaking. So I reached back out to Amy, who had been my mentor, and I said, hey, I feel like it's time for me to make a change professionally. My parents are still in the Youngstown area. And she said, well, I happen to have a position open right now. It was the coordinator of student development and retention, which is back to more like traditional student services, higher ed, student development. So I took that role. But as the old joke goes, you can take the man out of IT, but you can't take IT out of the man. I got there, and even during my interview, they said, we see you've got a real technology background. What might you be able to do with that to kind of move us forward? So in my time there, I literally built an entire honors student tracking system. They do what's called contract honors. Youngstown's a smaller public institution. There aren't a ton of dedicated honors classes. So what honors students do is they contract with a professor to do some kind of work above and beyond their regular coursework
Okay.
to earn honors credit. That used to be a paper form that you filled out and you wrote up what you were going to do and you signed it and you took it to the professor and the professor signed it by hand and then they took it to their department chair and they signed it by hand and then someone had to campus mail it back to the honors program. And I got there and I was like, it's like 2019. Why are we
Y'all
still
ever heard of the internet?
yeah, why are we still passing paper around? So the first thing I built was a complete contract management system. So the student filled out everything out online, it automatically workflowed to people, people approved it, and that kind of grew. It turned into a tracking system that the college had a dashboard of where all these things were. We built an integration to the student information system. They're a Banner campus, so every night a job runs that pulls a bunch of Banner data and loads it into this custom application that shows kind of just a dashboard of full spectrum of honors students because the SIS system itself couldn't do it. So they were running these reports all the time and putting them in an Access database. And I went, there is a better way. So over the 2 years I was there, I built out this whole workflow process and these 3 distinct applications that were used by the students, the faculty that engaged in contracts, and then a management platform for the honors college itself. And during the time, technical guy, my director's like, I know I can't pay you what you're worth, but why don't you go work on another master's degree while you're here? So I started a master's program in computer science while I was at Youngstown that I half finished. And as I'm kind of in the middle of all this, I'm still actively developing this new application. David Anthony, my predecessor here at Ohio State, announced he was leaving. And I went, ooh, that's kind of a dream job. It's hard to ignore that opportunity. But I actually did ignore it for a little while because I had heard about it and I'm like, oh, I just moved home. I'm close to my family. And then remind me later to tell you the story of like where I was when I applied and interviewed, because that's another fun story, but I don't want to get too sidetracked. So all of this was kind of in development when I got the offer to come to Ohio State. They wanted me to start in September, but there was too much stuff I needed to button up at Youngstown State. So I negotiated to stay in Youngstown another month to try and steady state everything I had built. And then where the scholarship comes in is I still maintain everything that I built at Youngstown State free of charge for them.
Okay.
I sign an agreement every spring that kind of establishes me as a volunteer employee of Youngstown State. And it's not by any stretch very time consuming for me, but as the person who built it, when something weird needs debugged, something I can debug in 5 minutes would take someone else a little longer. So I've
100%.
continued to maintain that over the 5 years I've been here. And they keep trying to pay me and I keep saying no. So the scholarship was our dean and the student trustees of the honors program's way of saying thank you, I guess, for continuing to to support the college, even though I'm no longer still working at Youngstown State officially. So that's how
Yeah.
that kind of came about. And then it's awarded to someone who either graduated, a sophomore honor student. So usually, if you're going to get scholarship money, usually you get it your freshman year and it's renewable. This is targeted at a sophomore student who's in the honors college, who's not on significant aid already, who either graduated from where I went to high school, which is Western Reserve Local in Berlin Center, or someone who's an Eagle Scout. Because we mentioned scouting was a big part of my life. So
Yeah.
that's how that scholarship
Well,
came around.
yeah, that's really cool. And good on you for maintaining that system for them. It's funny, we run into that in our business where some technical person builds an online photo submission solution and then they get hired at Google or Meta or something,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not kind enough to maintain the system. So that's where we come in and upgrade it for them with remote photo. So
Yeah.
anyways, so you have this technical experience at Youngstown State. The BuckID director of BuckID job opens up. Tell me about that process, getting hired as the director of BuckID.
Sure. Now here's the fun story. So we've already talked about that scouting's a big part of my life. I had heard that my predecessor was going to leave earlier in the year, but when he actually left and when the job got posted, I was at the World Scout Jamboree in West Virginia on staff. And that's, I was there for 2.5 weeks. And I knew it was coming and I kind of ignored it. And then someone called me while I was in West Virginia at the Jamboree and said, "Hey, this job is out there." And it was someone who had worked for me at Ohio University. And she said, "I really think you need to think about this. Like, I've read the job description and everything in it screams Josh should do this." And I'm like, I just moved back home. I have Thursday dinner with my parents every Thursday. I get to see my nieces and nephews more, things that were really important to me when I moved home. And I just don't know if I'm willing to give that up. So I kept doing this. And then if you want to, I had one of those moments where God was obviously pushing me in a direction. So I sat down at lunch. There are something like 4,000 or 5,000 staff at the World Scout Jamboree. I sit down for lunch one day and I'm just kind of making idle chit chat with someone. I said, "Oh, what do you do?" And he said, "I run the campus card office at a small university in Kentucky." And I said, "You do what now?"
No
That's
way.
exactly what I used to do. And it didn't happen just once. So the next day, I was on the aerial sports team, which manages the zip lines. The Summit, which is where the Boy Scouts National High Adventure Base is in West Virginia, has a program with WVDU where they do a science behind the sport, and they were set up directly across from us. And the young man who ran that program, he and I had chatted a lot over the first week we were there. And one day I had a similar conversation with him. "Oh, what do you do?" "Oh, I work in IT at WVU. I manage the campus card system." 2 people in 2 days. And I'm like, if that's not God telling me to apply for this job, I don't know what is. So I did. And I'm camping in the woods of West Virginia. I have literally my phone and my watch with me. I had to borrow someone's tablet and find like a 6-year-old resume on my Google Drive and update it and submit it. And I was like, it was one of those, you have to apply today to be considered, because I had been in the woods for 2 weeks. I wasn't really tracking, and I had been trying to ignore the position. So I applied. The next day I was invited for a phone interview. I did my phone interview sitting on the ground in front of a tent at the World Scout Jamboree. And then got
At least
an
it wasn't
invitation.
a video interview.
Yeah, no, it was just a phone interview, but I'm sure they heard a lot of happy scouts in the background.
Yeah.
And that turned into an on-campus interview, which turned into a job offer, which turned into it'll be 5 years that I've been here next week.
Here you are. Look at you
And
now.
here I am.
So tell me about like bringing that technical experience into your role now. How has that served you in some of the things that you want to do at Ohio State?
Yeah. So being more technical, I have kind of a focus on what are processes that could maybe be made more efficient by automation, or made more streamlined. So one of the first things I looked at is walk me through with the staff I supervise, walk me through some of the things that are the most time consuming for you. And we had some processes that like happened every week that like they'd run these processes manually and it would take 2 or 3 hours. I'm like, pretty sure we can automate all that and not have a human that has to do it. So I started focusing on things like that. Then we looked at, processes with auditing access control. Those were really manual. So I'm a PowerShell scripting person. Is kind of when I'm going to
Okay.
look at a task and automate it or try and make it simpler. That's my go-to. So I did a bunch of that within the first year of, I feel like there's a better way to do some of this. So I did a lot of that. And then we were still 100% magnetic stripe when I arrived in 2019. And part of what I was asked to really put focus and attention on was what's going to be the future of our credentialing program. We're still just mag stripe. We know we can't just stay on magnetic stripe much longer. We're either going to have to go to NFC contactless cards or to mobile. And it was to really plot that strategy out. Now, unfortunately for me, this little thing happened at the end of 2019 and beginning of 2020 called the pandemic. So
I've heard of
everything
it.
was kind of put on hold, and we went into, okay, well, what do we do to kind of maintain operations at the level that the university's ready for right now? And then there was a lot of, okay, well, here's what we've been doing for 6 months, but now we need to pivot into the next phase. So a lot of that kind of got shelved and put on hold until the last 2.5 years. So we did start, we did a big upgrade to all our printers. So being a technical person, it was trying to evaluate, okay, what's the right solution for us, both in the short term and the long term. I put a larger working group together because anytime you do anything like this, you need buy-in from other people. If you try and do it by yourself, you're likely to hit brick walls that you can avoid if you build enough consensus before you start. And we got wide buy-in throughout the university that at the very minimum, we need to start transitioning off magnetic stripe. So we replaced our ID production software and our hardware so that we could produce NFC cards on site and started to look at what mobile might look like for us. Now, obviously, with an investment like Ohio State's and how distributed we are not mobile ready at this point. There's still a lot of magstripe breeders out there. We've got plans to replace them, but it's a pretty expensive proposition, so it's taking us a little bit of time.
Yeah.
And the
So,
other thing, oh no, go ahead.
I'm really curious about that because I think there's this overwhelming admission by pretty much everybody in higher education that we want to go to mobile. Like almost everybody's there. I mean, I don't think I've met a single person who's like, nah, mobile
Never.
sucks. Or like that's a horrible idea. So especially for a campus as big as Ohio State, I mean, you guys are massive. I went there. It felt like going to school in a city. I mean, it's just huge. Um, Take me into those conversations where you're looking at mobile. You're saying this is really important, but it sounds like you're updated now to a contactless card. So we're at this contactless card technology. What are some of the things that you're considering when it goes into a decision about bringing mobile to Ohio State?
So the biggest consideration right now, like for most institutions, is what's the cost? How do we pay for it? How do we make the upgrades we need to make without, the normal solution is, oh, well, just make a new student fee and kind of go on your way. And our board of trustees has been very clear in recent years that they're very focused on affordability. They're not super interested in new fees. So we're trying to figure out what's our value proposition? How do we pay for this? And that doesn't mean that at some point the discussion won't happen, because at some schools it has. The student government has said, we really want this, and we think that a fee might make sense to help fund it. Because when you get to, we have 60,000 students, we have employees across the entire state between all our various campuses and extension sites. That's a lot of people. And, at $2 or $3 a person a year, that adds up pretty quickly. So that's, been the barrier. That's the thing we have to figure out, is how do we fund this in a way that makes sense and is sustainable with as little impact on the overall affordability for students as possible. Now, in the grand scheme of things, the fee that most institutions put out is relatively low.
Mm-hmm.
But our focus has been, all those little fees that everyone comes up with add up over time to a higher cost for students. And there's been a focus on trying to not do that, or only do it where it makes sense. So it's making that business case for, yes, we definitely need to do this. Here's how we think we can pay for it. Here's what the costs look like over time. So that's always been the kind of the stumbling point. And,
Mm-hmm.
mobile is at a point now where it's becoming more widestream. Even 5 years ago, there were only a handful of schools that were already there. And it's like anything else. The hope is that as that technology gets wider, becomes more mainstreamed, there's more players, that it'll help start to bring the
Cost
costs
lower
down
down.
some.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you look at mobile, what, and you kind of plot your list of like the biggest value, right? What are the biggest value points that mobile brings to the table for you?
I think there's an aspect of convenience, and the age of Apple Pay, where people have gotten used to like, oh, there we go, I just paid for that, or
Same.
oh, there we go, I just opened my door. I think there's a convenience factor there. Students seem less likely to lose said watch or phone than they are to lose a piece of plastic. They also are usually less willing to hand it to someone else and be without it. Like, oh, my girlfriend or boyfriend's coming to visit, I'll just give them my plastic card to come and go as they please. I think you're a little less likely to say, here, just take my phone and come and go as you please. So there are those convenience and kind of security aspects of it. Eventually it reduces the footprint of what you've got to print plastic cards for. Now there are, and this gets talked about a lot at NACU, there are use cases where a plastic card may make more sense than mobile. We have a hospital that we recently merged their badging program into ours. They've been very clear that they don't want mobile on the table for their staff because they need them to have a physical card that they're wearing all the time for Joint
Yeah.
Commission requirements.
Yep.
And they want it to be, they don't want you to have an option that doesn't involve you showing up at work with that badge on your person and being worn. So I think there's still places where we're going to need the infrastructure to print plastic cards and people who will need them. But a student population of 60,000, we print each incoming class. I mean, this incoming class was huge. It's over 9,000, but a standard class is somewhere in the 8,000 range. That's, if we get most of the students to mobile first, that's plastic that we never have to print. And that they might never lose, that we might have to print again. So there's some sustainability aspects of not doing plastic cards and everything that goes into having to have the equipment and the life cycle on plastic cards. Is that a huge cost savings? It's hard to say when you compare it against what you pay for mobile, with mobile being recurring instead of the first card, which is, that's a one-time cost. And some students, do a lot of students lose them and replace them while they're here for 4 years? Yes. But there's also students who might get that first card and never lose it. We have employees who come back and say, oh yeah, I still have my original BuckID from when I was a student in 1996.
Yeah.
So those are out there too.
Yeah.
So I think those are but there is I'm, again, techie person. I would love to just be able to tap my watch and open a door and not have to, get my wallet out or get my card out. But I think a lot of the schools that have waited is the convenience enough to justify the expense at the scale of Ohio State, where we have thousands of readers that need replaced, some of which might not be that old, aren't at their life cycle already. So how do you kind of balance out that wow and convenience factor against just the sheer cost? Now,
Yeah. You
that
got to
being
justify
said,
it.
yeah, there's certainly the argument, and like I mentioned with our what we call our BuckID 3.0 project, the transition to NFC cards, there's certainly a justification that magnetic stripe is a legacy technology. It's inherently insecure. It's really easy to duplicate with just some basic knowledge and some components you can buy off Amazon. So that argument's easier to make, but to get to the jump of a recurring charge for mobile is a little of a further leap.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting to hear you um, say like convenience was that was the first thing you talked about. When you think about mobile, it's going to be more convenient for the student, right? They can tap their watch, open their door, open the dorm, open the gym, whatever. Because we're starting to move into the security industry, you know, healthcare companies, Fortune 500 companies, and they view mobile. I mean, like higher ed's looking at mobile, the security industry is looking at mobile, and they're viewing them from a different lens. Like
Mm-hmm.
security sees it more from the security angle, higher ed sees it more from the customer experience angle, and I don't know. That's just kind of been fascinating to me because we come from higher ed, and yeah, that's where we started. And I never thought we had a security product. I just thought we had a customer experience product. So as I'm talking to customers, like they're talking about updated current photo, visual identification. So it's been fascinating for me to just see the two different worlds and how they view the same thing. You know, the mobile ID. So very interesting stuff. But thanks for sharing how you're thinking through it, justifying the cost. I mean, it's a big lift to change. You're gonna have to change out all the readers or a lot of the readers to
Yeah,
make it
most of
happen.
them.
Yeah.
And some of it is, I mentioned because of the size of Ohio State, we're pretty distributed. Um, I run one of the access control systems, but there are others. So I don't only have to make those upgrades to the area I directly control, but I also have to work with campus partners to get all of their readers upgraded. And that's a harder lift because, I don't have as much direct influence. Now, part of my focus since I've been here is building relationships and selling why we are all trying to go the same direction together. But at the end of the day, our friends and facilities may say, this building needs a new roof and the upgraded card readers just got bumped to put the new roof on. And I can't argue with that. Yes, I think we shouldn't have a leaky roof, or yes, the cooling
Sure.
system in that building needs repaired. And those are sometimes the trade-offs that you're making. And I can't think of any public university who's like, oh yeah, we just have tons of money laying around to do whatever we want. It's always how do we prioritize and what's urgent and our top priority now. And sometimes card reader upgrades are not at the top of that list, or they're a smaller part of it, and might take 5 or 6 years to do.
Some people have described, I think I've heard this at NACU, the card office as the redheaded stepchild of the institution. But you guys are so powerful. I mean, you're the center of student life in a lot of ways. You power all the transactions. You power, a lot of the security at the institution. So, how have you managed? Um, how have you been able to establish some influence, right? Where it's like, hey guys, this is really important. We need to do this. Is it relationship building? Yeah, just talk me through that process. What does it look like to be a leader in a card office and try and establish some influence there?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. It's building relationships. So, not to quote a famous Ohio State football coach, but as Woody Hayes famously said, you win with people. So one of the first things I did when I came here was try and meet as many people as I could and understand what our interface points were with them, and how we could help them. What solution could we offer that could meet a need they had or help them with something they were working on, even if it wasn't directly related to us. Because, the time will come where I might need their help on something, and they'll hopefully remember the time that we were there for them or help them solve a problem, or helped, host an event maybe that we didn't directly have anything to do with. But we want to be good partners. We want to be a part of building the Ohio State experience inside and outside of student life. And I think people recognize that. So they see us as that good partner. And when we do come to them and say, hey, we want to talk about this, they come to the table. And, that doesn't mean that they're always going to agree to what I want them to agree to, or to say the things I want to hear. But we've got relationships where people will come to the table, and we know we're all in it for what's best for our students. We know we all want to do the right thing. and it brings dialogue. I know it sounds like we're repeating over and over. It's a big place. There are a lot of different people who have a lot of different influence, and uh, you can't force things.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work. You have to build consensus. You have to build relationships, and sometimes it's the ones that are really helpful aren't necessarily obvious to you. And it can't be, there's some people who take more of a transactional approach, like I'm only building this relationship because I know I want this thing later. That's not kind of my approach and my style. It's I want to be a part of this institution. I want to be a part of moving it forward, and I want to understand who I can work with, how I can help. And it doesn't mean that it will help me later. It means that the end result is something better for our students.
Right. It shocked me when I first started working at Cloud Card. Now, our product's remote photo. It shocked me how many people had to get involved in the sale of something. I'm like, oh, this will be easy. Like, we have this awesome product, people will love it. And then it's like, well, IT has to look at it, they got to sign off. And then procurement has to sign off and legal has to sign off. Sometimes marketing had to get, like, it was shocking. So I definitely resonate with just that it's a big effort to move something forward inside of such a big organization. You talked about leadership and not being transactional in your leadership style. Can you tell me about some of the leadership lessons you've learned along the way as you've, all the way from Eagle Scouts to some of your experiences to even running the office now?
Yeah, I think a lot of it goes back to scouting. I started scouts when I was 8 or 9,
Okay.
as a Cub Scout. Was through scouts all through high school, and what I still call my first job, even though it wasn't my first big kid job, I was a camp counselor. I worked on a summer camp staff for 6 summers. From the time I was a CIT at 14, and then I worked at camp until I was 21 or 22, when the camp that I worked at actually stopped being a summer camp. That's the only reason I left. There's always this thought that, if I could still go work at camp in the summer, I would probably do it. And I think that's where a lot of my early leadership lessons came from, is through scouting. People who are involved in scouting probably know there's a big focus on the program being youth led. When you get into Scouts BSA, which is the 12-year-olds and older program. Cub Scouts with the younger leaders do more of the planning, but once you get into Scouts BSA, it's about the youth planning everything, and you have to learn how to work with other youth, build consensus. And I was very fortunate. The leaders and the troop I was in were very much like, oh, we will 100% let you fail. We won't let you do anything dangerous or get hurt, but if you're not going to build consensus or you're not going to plan things well, we'll let you have the experience of what that will mean. And that's so, let's call that failing in a positive direction with guardrails. We were never unsafe. There was
Mm-hmm.
never a risk that, people weren't going to be able to eat, or that we were going to do something that someone would get hurt. I mean, there's always some risk, but it was never to the extent of that. But like, oh, sure, yeah, you can plan to have peanut butter and jelly for lunch and dinner and breakfast the next day, but let's see how everyone feels after that.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that those were great lessons, for a 12, 13, 14-year-old to learn, um, about how to lead and being the kind of leader that someone would want to follow. And, there's a lot of focus on everyone having the chance to lead and be in a role that gives them exposure to leadership. You don't have to be, like in Scouts, you don't have to be the senior patrol leader to be a leader. In work, you don't have to be the director of a department to be a leader. We all have our spheres of influence. We all have the things that we can lead and the difference we can make. And I think that was a lesson I learned early in life. Like, there isn't just one leader and you look to them for everything. Everyone has aspects where they can lead and where you should empower them to lead. Um, And that, like I said, those lessons go all the way back to my scouting career and being on camp staff. Now, obviously, professionally, you start to see that and apply it in a different way, but it's still the same general lessons. How do you look for the gifts in the people around you, and how do you share leading? Maybe someone's got a particular talent for an area, so through consensus, they're the one who leads that. Um, Now, are there times where there are I think there's a difference between management and leadership. Management has all these tasks and responsibilities and things that come along with it, but I think there's a difference between that and leadership. And I think anyone can have their leadership skills developed, can lead in certain situations. And it doesn't mean that they also have to be someone who's got some kind of authority or some kind of management role. I think people who have leadership skills and who do it well are better in management roles,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have to have a role to be a leader.
100%. I love what you said there. Like that example of um, making those peanut butter and jellies in the Scouts, and you probably had a big bellyache the next day. After eating all those PB and J's, but you learned a valuable lesson, and there's value in making a decision, even if it's the wrong one. And that's something we try and do here is like giving people ownership and responsibility over something, giving them feedback, giving them perspective when they ask, but also saying at the end of the day, this is your decision. Even if it's wrong, that's okay, right? Most of the time, we're not talking about, this isn't war. It's not like people are dying if we make the wrong decision, right? Like a customer might not be as happy. Maybe we got to pivot. We go through the door and like, that wasn't the right door. Let's like go back through this other door. So, and it gives people like, it's fun to make decisions. That's part of the game,
Yep.
So I actually, it's funny, in preparation for this podcast, I was actually looking at local Boy Scout units in our area because I have a 3-year-old, and I'm like, this would be a really cool thing for him to get involved with, because I definitely resonate with that idea of, man, it's failure is oftentimes our greatest teacher, and you got to be able to make those decisions, make those mistakes, like you said, with guardrails, but those lessons stay with you for a while. So cool. I want to ask you, what are you most excited about right now with BuckID?
So we're just coming off of a big project with our medical center. For years, we had this kind of split system where the medical center kind of did its own thing, separate of campus, and people had to go both places because there are a ton of people who work in the medical center but have some relationship with campus as well. And even some of the medical center staff, their offices are in campus buildings. And we finally, after 18 months of planning and several months of implementation, have one ID card now. You'd think, that would be step one of setting up a program like this, is have one card for the whole institution. Well, and this year is actually the 30th anniversary of BuckID as a comprehensive ID program of the program it is today. So it took us, 29 and a half years, but we finally have a single ID card for the whole institution. So that is exciting for us just because it's a better customer experience for everyone. It's more secure for everyone. We're not going to tell a neurosurgeon that, sorry, your office is in an academic building because you're a faculty member too. So I know you're busy, but you got to go over to the campus ID office and get a card there too. Now they can get one thing. So that's exciting for us. Is it the cool, sexy project? No. But it's a big step forward for having a comprehensive, unified program for the entire institution. So we're excited about that. I'm always excited about new technologies. We are marching towards mobile, I would say. When and how, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not sure when we'll get there, but we're headed that direction. But we're also looking at what are other options. Mobile is diversifying. There are more options to look at now than there were before, and I'm really excited about digging into them. Now, it still may be that we go with a solution from our transaction system provider. But there are other options out there now that I'm excited to be able to look at and really dig into that weren't there even 2 or 3 years ago. So we're always looking at what's out there, what makes the most sense for Ohio State, how can we leverage existing relationships we have with partners to find the right solution. And like I said, I'm not saying that it's not going to be the out of the box approach that other schools have taken, but we're also not opposed to being different, maybe doing our own thing. And we don't know what that looks like. I mean, there's tons
Yeah.
of anyone following Apple closely knows that our friends in Europe have forced their hand on a few things, including opening up NFC to more large scale development outside of the partners who have historically had access to it. And I think that's going to make a difference in mobile. I think you'll see smaller providers start to be able to develop a solution that might be more cost effective. I think that will put pressure on some of the bigger providers to make sure their cost models are reasonable and make sense for them and their customers. Because I'm never saying that our corporate partners shouldn't make a living and shouldn't pay their bills, but I think sometimes until there's pressure and competition in the market, it's easy to say, we could charge just a little more for that, because that's what business is, and I won't fault anyone. So I'm excited to see what that does, and I think you might even see campuses start to look at, is this possible? Could we do something ourselves? So I think it'll be interesting to see where all that goes over the next probably 5 or 10 years, as that becomes the barrier into being able to even develop something for NFC was really high for a really long
Right.
time. It's still not low, but instead of being maybe 20 feet high, now it's 12 feet high. So I think there'll be more people at least experimenting in the space. And I think that's good for the consumer, because I think it'll help drive innovation, but also drive making sure costs stay reasonable for consumers like me who are concerned about,
Absolutely.
because everything gets passed on to the students in one way or another. So
I 100% agree. And you're right. You'll have some more options, and that's a good thing. So Josh, as we close our time out, I want to ask you, what would you be doing if you weren't in the campus ID card space?
So I hinted to this already. I have always dreamed that one day I'm going to retire and I'm going to move to a camp somewhere and be either a camp ranger or a year-round camp director. I love the outdoors. I love camping. I love hiking. I love swimming. I miss just the environment of a camp and kind of the things you see, especially youth camps, the development you see. And I worked at a camp for 7 or 8 years, so I would watch campers who I met when they were first years to the time that some of them were Eagle Scouts themselves, and you see a lot of growth and development. And now, not all of that happens at camp. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that like camp is this magic thing. Okay, I am saying that, but it's not the magic wand that'll cure everything. But I just love, and to some extent, and my parents will tell you this, they said, working at a university is kind of like working at grown-up summer camp. Students come here, they're here for some kind of purpose. In this case, it's academic. They're building their future. They're learning, they're growing, they're becoming better citizens. That's a lot of what summer camp is. A college is just a much longer summer camp. So I think my parents joke that that's why I ended up in higher ed, is I realized summer camp wasn't something I could do for my entire life. So I looked for the closest thing that I could make a career out of. And when you're in residence life and running residence halls, that feels a lot like running a camp. You're doing activities for their free time. You're encouraging them to be safe and make good choices. That's a lot like being a camp counselor. So that is one day, if I leave Ohio State, hopefully in 20 years, not anytime soon, but I could see myself finding, and there's a listserv for year-round jobs at camp that I may or may not have been on in the past.
Oh man. Well, that makes one of us. I loved my camp experiences. I went to a camp called Scioto Hills. I think it was in Ohio. I don't know. I went to camp. I had a blast. And then I was actually a camp counselor in upstate New York at Word of Life Bible Institute for a summer. And man, I got to tell you, it was exhausting. I loved it. It was fun. It was rewarding. But the kids would come, I believe it was a Sunday, and they'd stay Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. We'd have a Saturday off where we'd essentially sleep the whole day.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next round of campers would come Sunday.
Sounds very familiar.
And yeah, I was very happy that summer ended, but it was also very rewarding at the same time. So that's cool. I'm glad you're, I think a lot of people, when they talk about retirement, it's just like, oh, I'm going to finish my job and then I'm going to retire and I'm going to, sit on a beach somewhere. And I'm always like, I think I'm going to want to be doing something.
Yeah.
Whether that's mowing the grass or doing pottery or, something with my hands just to stay active.
Yep. I'm the same way. I can't sit still that long. I will not handle retirement well if I don't have something to do.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. All right. So I like to end with this question. I want a movie recommendation, a podcast recommendation, and a book recommendation.
Oh no. Oh, I'm not good at this at all. So I very rarely turn on my television anymore.
Really?
I'm not home a lot. The joke is that I have a really nice home that my cat lives in that I go visit sometimes. So
are
a lot
you
of
busy at work or?
Yeah, I do a lot at work. I'm also really involved in my church. I sing in the choir.
Okay.
I'm a youth leader for our youth group. And we're searching for a new senior pastor and I'm on the search committee. So
Okay.
I'm there 3 or 4 nights a week right now or in meetings, and then I'm at work. We took on some additional staff. So I have a tendency of like my staff, when they leave for the day, will pop over and say, hey, don't forget to go home eventually. So maybe I'm not super work-life balance focused right now. So a lot of my favorite movies are old.
Okay.
And I will drive my students crazy quoting old movies. And the 2 movies that they will tell you I quote the most are the cult classic Clue with Tim Curry.
I haven't.
Oh, you should check that out.
I'm going to add it to my movie list. I have a list and I actually like write down movie recommendations. So when my wife and I, turn on the TV, we're not like scrolling through Netflix forever.
Yep. So. I love the movie Clue. I also love the Mel Brooks classic Spaceballs.
Okay. Haven't watched that one either.
How about one more 80s movie that I love is The Goonies.
Okay. Yep.
So those are, and see, I told you, old movies. Or that, I've always been a Star Trek fan, so any of the Star Treks I'm usually pretty okay with. Not Star Wars, more of a Star Trek person. But yeah, in terms of like modern movies, I'm awful.
Hey,
I'm not
that's
the
okay.
guy.
No judgment. I like the classics. All about it.
A book I've been reading lately is Accidental Saints is a cool book.
Okay.
I have a small group of, 20, 30 somethings, and we've been reading it together over the course of the summer. So that's a cool one to check out.
Okay.
I haven't been a big podcast guy lately, but now obviously I'm going to have to check out yours.
Well, you'll be a listener, my mom and my wife. So we'll have probably 3 people listening to the podcast.
Hey, when this one comes out, I'm going to send it far and wide.
There you go. There you go. Well, Josh, thank you so much for being here. It was great to spend some time with you. If you're ever in the Lynchburg, Virginia area, let me know. We can do some hiking on the, in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. But yeah, thanks for your time. And I'm sure I will see you around at NACU or something.
For sure. It was good talking with you, Luke.
All right. Thanks.